Why are we led to make the choices that we do? Is it for our survival? Are we naturally predisposed to choose whatever most benefits or protects us? Is it for our own self-betterment? Do we desire to accomplish, achieve, conquer, become something more than what we once were? Is it for the people we care about? Are we inclined to choose their welfare before our own? Is it all of these things? Is it something else? I want to talk about choices today, specifically the choices that you and I make in Davy Wreden and William Pugh's The Stanley Parable, and what it is that really gives those in-game choices meaning. After all, your choices as a player aren't meaningful because of what happens inside of the game. They're meaningful because of what happens inside of you. The Stanley Parable is one of my favorite video games. It seamlessly weaves comedy, philosophy, and gamer culture into this trippy tapestry of decision-making and subverted expectations. I love the sense of humor that it has.
If you find yourself speaking with a person who does not make sense, in all likelihood, that person is not real.
I cannot recommend The Stanley Parable to you enough if you enjoy story-driven artistic games. If you'd like to experience it for yourself, please go do that before you keep watching, because I'm going to spoil many of the game's surprises. The Ultra Deluxe version is out on PC and console now, and it's only like $25. Also, I'm writing all of this under the assumption that you have already played the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe to the end, and are familiar with the story, the characters, these statue guys, how you make choices by walking through doors and clicking on stuff, how endings work, and how the game resets every time you complete one, how the Ultra Deluxe version is an expansion of the base game, but also polishes it more and includes this whole thing that turns the game into the Stanley Parable 2. Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about this game. So I apologize to those of you who haven't played it and are watching anyway, because you're probably going to feel some confusion. The quintessential moment of the entire Stanley Parable is this small room with a pair of doorways. You'll come to this room over and over again every time the game resets and hear the narrator say these words.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
This is the core conceit of the game, its greatest question. In media like film and literature and so on, only one creative voice is present, the voice of the person or team of people who made whatever work it is you are engaged with at the time. But in video games, that's not the case. If your medium is interactive, the person interacting with it has, to some degree, a creative voice of their own that they get to exert on the world you created for them. So, what happens if they say something you didn't expect them to? This issue, the relationship between game players and game makers, is one that the Stanley Parable explores in a variety of contexts, starting with this choice that you will make countless times as you play through the game. This isn't really about picking between 2 doors. I mean, they look identical. If you played this game with the sound off, the choice would be completely meaningless. You might as well flip a coin to decide. The real choice here is the relationship you will have with the narrator, whether or not you trust this unusual, disembodied, English-accented voice. For example, perhaps you're curious about what happened to Stanley's coworkers and want to follow this voice to find out. Perhaps you get annoyed when strangers tell you what to do and want to rebel. And I could go on, because even though you only have 2 doors to pick from in this scenario, you could have any number of reasons motivating the choice you finally end up making. That motivation, whatever it is, happens inside the player in response to the external direction of the narrator, and the feeling of fulfilling that motivation is likely going to be as rewarding, if not more so, than whatever cool external thing the game gives to you depending on your actions. For example, after you disobey the narrator twice and then jump off the cargo lift onto the catwalk, this happens.
There's someone you've been neglecting, Stanley. Someone you...
What? Really?
I was in the middle of something. Do you have 0 consideration for others?
And that's great comedic dialogue to play here, but what's more important is that this dialogue verifies your decision to rebel. It proves to the player that they did the right thing by jumping off, and encourages them to keep pushing the game to its limits. This moment is satisfying because for whatever personal reason you had, you wanted a chance to go against the will of the narrator, and you got that chance. On that same note, there's something satisfying about getting to control your own thoughts and feelings even when control in the game is taken away from you. One of my favorite endings to the Stanley Parable happens after you follow the narrator through the door on the left, up some stairs, down this spooky elevator, through the mind control facility, up another elevator until you reach the facility power controls where at long last you disobey the narrator for the first time in this lengthy chain of events by reactivating the mind control facility.
Oh, Stanley. You didn't just activate the controls, did you?
He gets pretty mad at you for this.
In the event that this machine is activated without proper DNA identification, nuclear detonators are set to explode. How long until detonation then? Let's say, 2 minutes.
I gotta say, the presentation of this scene holds a treasured place for me. The music has all the intensity of a Christopher Nolan film. There's something that just deeply excites me about this giant countdown timer on the wall, inching closer to annihilation every second. And the narrator's speech, wow.
Oh, this is much better than what I had in mind. What a shame we have so little time left to enjoy it. Mere moments until the bomb goes off. But what precious moments each one of them is. More time to talk about you, about me, where we're going, what all this means. I barely know where to start.
Pay attention to what he says here.
Take a look at the clock, Stanley. That's 30 seconds you have left to struggle. 30 seconds until a big boom and then nothing. No ending here, just you being blown to pieces. Will you cling desperately to your frail life, or will you let it go peacefully? Another choice.
And every time I've played this ending in recent memory, I've chosen peaceful acceptance of the destruction that is coming, slowly walking around the control room, soaking in the incredible atmosphere of this event, and Kevin Brighting's formidable voice performance of an iron-fisted man demanding to stay in control of his dying world. I didn't come here and reactivate the mind control system because I wanted to overcome this game or feel powerful. I came here for this.
This is not a challenge, it's a tragedy. You wanted to control this world, that's fine. But I'm going to destroy it first, so you can't.
There's one more choice I want to talk about before wrapping things up. For context, the Ultra Deluxe expansion of the Stanley Parable added a new character to the mix, someone who communicates directly with the player through these settings menus each time you start the game. These conversations, we'll call them, happen sequentially, one at a time. At first, this person simply asks the player to set the game up, basic stuff like choose your language, brightness, time of day. Then on the next conversation, this mysterious person asks you to set the clock a second time, and then it gets silly for a while. Who wouldn't pick this one instead of the number 9? And then, in that special Stanley Parable way, things suddenly get a little unsettling. Eventually, the person working the settings decides that they don't know you, and that they can't get to know you through these shallow settings menus in a video game. They conclude that all they've learned about you is that you like being alone, because isn't that how video games were meant to be played? Importantly, they allude to one more setting that needs to be configured, one more choice to make, and then they vanish, telling the player to come and find them. And that brings us to the game's epilogue, which you unlock here in the main menu after finishing all of these conversations from the pre-game settings menu, as well as after collecting all of these Stanley statues and seeing the ending associated with them. You're standing in the middle of the desert from the Memory Zone ending. You wander for a few days and nights under the beautiful open sky as this thoughtful, relaxing melody fills the space around you, until finding yourself at that same archway the narrator first brought you to after his disappointment with the original new content. And there in the distance, his shrine to the original Stanley Parable rests shattered. You step inside, down a tunnel, copies of the button that says Jim scattered throughout the cave, providing light. And you come to these negative reviews that were written specifically for the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, before collecting some last few figurines and sliding down another tunnel into this archetypal room, this first and final place. And I had this feeling of reverence seeing it like this, and a feeling of bittersweet joy at that callback to the first time the game said it was finished sharing its new content. And this calm feeling of suspense, but also an idea of what was coming as I sat down at one last computer monitor, reminiscent of the place where Stanley received and accepted menial instructions for all those years. I wasn't surprised that I found my settings friend here, and in my heart I agreed with them about how sad it was to see that the Stanley Parable was finally over. I was happy with the idea of getting to give the game my own subtitle by choosing words to put together from these randomized lists, and as funny as names like grilled paper jam or dealing with the tax disc sounded, on my first time through, Beyond Thank You was the only one that seemed appropriate after an experience that had made me laugh and reflect and feel wonder and happiness and unease so many times. But when this mysterious person, longing so badly for the Stanley Parable to not be over, proposed prolonging the franchise forever with endlessly iterating sequels. When they said, screw the legacy, I just felt that doing this to a game that I loved was wrong. I was so impressed with the new content I had been given in Ultra Deluxe that I was okay with letting that be enough, with letting that be the end. I was so happy with it that I was okay with letting it go. And it felt so right for me to say that this was the end, to a game that had always said to me, the end is never the end. The truth is there has to be an end, and in a way that's what makes everything before the end valuable. And as far as the game is concerned, all I got for choosing this outcome were these lines of text and the continuation of this moody, red title sequence. But on the inside, I had the feeling that I had done the right thing, that I had stood up for the artistic integrity of one of my favorite stories, that I had achieved peace and closure in the face of something that I cared about coming to its conclusion. And even though all of this had happened in a fictional universe, these feelings were still deeply fulfilling to me, deep enough that I remembered them and wanted to share them. Isn't it amazing what a good combination of storytelling and game design can make people feel? In closing, emotions are subjective. So is art. The experience I had playing the Stanley Parable is different from the ones you and everyone else had, and part of that is because I was really leaning into the choices I was making, trying to own them and put myself into this fictional environment. Please don't think that choosing not to prolong the franchise is the canonical or correct choice, because it doesn't really matter which one is right or wrong. These are fictional choices. Alternatively, I'm sure that everyone who chose their first time around to keep the franchise going forever had a great time doing that. On a different playthrough, I did agree to create indefinite sequels with the settings menu person to find out what that choice does, and some of the title screens for these iteratively numbered sequels are hilarious. Whatever your experience with this game was like, I hope you enjoyed hearing mine, and that it demonstrated how impactful the choices we make in video games can be when they rely on intrinsic values or motivations or feelings, as long as those things are inside the player instead of on the external rewards offered by the game. So, game developers, design wisely.